morning, I'll call on the Honourable Minister responsible for health to grace us with prayers.
Let us pray. Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honor, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established among us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, official members and ministers of Cabinet, and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Administration of oaths and affirmations. Oath of affirmation and due execution. Oath of allegiance and due execution by Mr. Eric Lennox Bush, the Honourable Acting Deputy Governor, to be the temporary ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly.
I'll now invite the Honourable Deputy Governor to take his place at the dais. All rise.
I, Eric Lennox Bush, do swear that I will faithfully and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God. I, Eric Lennox Bush, do swear that I will well and truly serve Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, and the people of the Cayman Islands in the office of ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly. So help me God.
Mr. Bush, I trust that your last visit, the welcome was warm enough to not have to be extended again this morning, but for the avoidance of doubt, may I once again extend your welcome to this honorable chamber. Please take your seat.
Oath of allegiance and due execution by Jacqueline Wilson, the Honourable Acting Attorney General, to be the temporary ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly.
I invite the Attorney General to take her place at the dais.
I, Jacqueline Wilson, do swear that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, according to law. So help me God. I, Jacqueline Wilson, do swear that I will well and truly serve Her Majesty, Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, and the people of the Cayman Islands in the office of ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly. So help me God.
Attorney General, I'd like to welcome you to these honorable chambers, and as much as we enjoy the company of your male counterpart, it is good to have some gender balance, albeit of a temporary basis. Welcome.
Hear, hear.
Please be seated.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of Messages and Announcements.
I have received apologies for the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Statements by the Honourable Members and Ministers of the Cabinet.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the vision for our students is that they will be confident, motivated learners and responsible, productive citizens who are capable of succeeding in a globally competitive world. To achieve this, the Ministry of Education and other education stakeholders must ensure that the education system provides suitable and relevant learning environments that best enable our students to succeed. Madam Speaker, over the past 7 years, there have been significant changes within the government education system, with accompanying increases in overall student performance being achieved during that same period. However, Madam Speaker, it is recognized that further improvements are needed to tackle areas of underperformance and to achieve the best possible educational outcomes for all children. Madam Speaker, as Minister of Education, I am committed to the very highest standards of education for all our students in all our schools. I have never lost sight of the fact that we must put children first in all that we do in education. With that said, it is essential that our education team continue to self-reflect, invite external scrutiny, and be willing to face up to the hard questions and issues. Madam Speaker, since taking up my role, I've engaged in consultation with a number of stakeholders, including officers in the Ministry and Department of Education Services, principals, teachers, students, parents, the business community, and the general public. As part of the consultation process, a number of strengths and areas for improvement have been identified. Madam Speaker, much has been done over the past year to identify these strengths, to identify the gaps and areas of weakness in education system. And steps have been taken, Madam Speaker, and resources have been dedicated to address some of these issues identified. However, Madam Speaker, a more detailed analysis of each school and a more detailed analysis of the governance, management, and structure of the education system as a whole is needed at this stage to assist with policy and planning purposes going forward. Again, the goal is to create an education system that puts the interests and welfare of the children first. One of the areas of feedback has been the need to have independent evaluations of the education system so that progress can be measured. Schools, Department of Education Services, and the Ministry need to be able to build on strengths, to identify those gaps, and to plan for and make improvements that will benefit our children. Madam Speaker, over the past 5 years, only a very limited range of inspections were undertaken using outsourced resources to complement a small core team. However, in order to help determine the effectiveness of our quest to strive for excellence in education, the reintroduction of the inspection process as an independent process is critical. To this end, I have requested that inspections of all government schools take place as a matter of priority to establish a baseline data set on student progress and achievement, effectiveness of teaching and its impact on learning, leadership and management, and the quality of provision and student outcomes in the foundation subjects of English and mathematics. Madam Speaker, the pre-inspection process has already started, and all government school inspections are due to be completed by June 2015. In addition to this being an independent process, it is also necessary that this be a transparent process, with the results of the inspections being shared with all stakeholders. I reiterate, Madam Speaker, that the goal is to put children first, and I'm confident that parents and the community in general will want to know the results of these inspections, and most importantly, work with the Department of Education Services and schools in implementing the recommendations made. With that said, the final inspections reports will be delivered to the Ministry for onward transition to Cabinet and the Education Council. These reports, Madam Speaker, will also be published on the Ministry's website. Madam Speaker, it is the intention that an executive summary report providing a summary of the outcomes of the baseline inspections of all schools will be laid on the table of the Legislative Assembly in due course. The work on rebuilding the Education Quality Assurance Unit will begin in the 14-15 financial year with the recruitment of a Chief Inspector of Schools. It is anticipated, Madam Speaker, that a new inspection schedule for public and private schools will be ready for implementation following the completion of the baseline inspections. Madam Speaker, at this stage of the education reform process, and in addition to the planned school inspections in the current school year, the Ministry of Education is also engaging the services of an external and objective body to conduct an independent review of the government education system. The review will be considered by the Ministry in conjunction with the findings of the planned baseline inspection of the public schools. Madam Speaker, the objective is to provide a review to determine what changes could be made to drive further system-wide improvements, which should result in improved educational outcomes for our students. Further, the review is expected to identify options that could be pursued to establish a governance model which leverages a strengthened relationship, participation, and commitment of parents, the private sector, and civic society in public education. Madam Speaker, the Ministry has already begun to conduct research to consider a governance model based on the establishment of school boards or similar structures to manage the operational aspects of individual or groups of schools. This system review, Madam Speaker, is expected to consider this and other potential governance models for their suitability to the Cayman Islands government education system and to make recommendations on the steps needed to transition to the proposed model. Although the terms of reference are still being finalized, Madam Speaker, it is anticipated that the review will focus on two key areas: the education provision and student outcomes, which include evaluation of the standard and the existing government education system in terms of student performance, including comparisons with agreed international benchmarks where possible, and stakeholder satisfaction, evaluation of the current ministry policies, plans, and initiatives, and the extent which they addressed or have the potential to address key system needs, undertaking a gap analysis to identify areas for improvement or change to meet the various needs. With respect to governance, Madam Speaker, the issues to be considered will be identification of various models for an enhanced private sector partnership in the governance of the government education system, which could be adapted to suit the needs of the public education system in the Cayman Islands and which have the best potential to improve student outcomes. Identification of the pros and cons of each model and implications for implementation, including changes to the current governance model, structures, systems, and processes to facilitate a transition to each of the recommended models. And a report of key findings and make recommendations as to the priority areas and strategic actions to be undertaken by the Ministry to improve the performance of the government education system. Madam Speaker, this education review is planned to commence in October of this year, and is anticipated to be completed by the end of the year. Madam Speaker, at this stage, it is important to emphasize that any model to be established will ensure that there is accommodation for all students and that all students are supported. Again, I will stress the fact that the goal of the ongoing education reform effort is to put children first, and I look forward to the support of you, my colleagues, the civil service, and the community at large in ensuring that this goal is achieved. Thank you.
I also recognize the member from East End.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, pursuant to Section Standing Order 32, I wonder if you would allow me to ask the Minister a question, please.
I'll allow a maximum of 3 brief questions.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Minister, I didn't hear the Minister say anything about expanding this review to the Department of Educational, DES, Department of Educational Services. And I wonder if the Minister has an intention of reviewing the governance of the Department of Educational Services.
Honourable Minister for Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, member, for that question. The section dealing with the education review is to do exactly that, is to look at the systems, structures in place, including what is established within the ministry, the Department of Educational Services, and then the schools, and how the actual system as a whole operates. And so the purpose of the educational review from that perspective is to look at the management, the governance, the structure of the education system in the country, public education system in the country.
I recognize the 3rd elected member from West Bay.
Could the Minister please state if this review will include the physical aspect as well, because I've just been informed that you cut, once again, the physical education part down. They're taking teachers who are qualified in one area to do another area. Will this section also be reviewed carefully as well? Because it's known fact that we have an obesity problem in this country. It's a known fact that when children are fit, they learn better. Will this also be reviewed? Because what's happening now is really a joke.
Honourable Minister for Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you, member, for that question. The issue of the review obviously is going to be looking at a number of factors. It's going to be looking at the ability of the system currently to deliver on what the national curriculum calls for, and one of the aspects of the national curriculum is dealing with physical education. So the member's point is noted with respect to the issue of physical education in schools. Obviously, the timetabling in schools is is a bit of a science, and so to be able to address the needs of physical activities is a vital and important aspect, and I agree that there needs to be something put in place to ensure that we're doing that. And as we, just so the member knows, we're actually looking to do that currently by leveraging some of the existing activities and programs in the schools, such as the extended after-school program, to see how we can strengthen that program to ensure that the students that participate in that will get it, as well as looking at possibly working with the Department of Sports or the Ministry of Sports to see how they can complement as well. But in general, the review will be to look at ways of how we can, as I said, leverage the partnership of public and private sector and interested community organizations, because the fact is, Madam Speaker, there are more needs in our system than the public purse alone can finance, but also in terms of just building that sense of community that I think is so vital and needed in terms of our education system moving forward. So the outcome of that review will hopefully give us a clear pathway that we can follow with respect to achieving that goal.
Recognize the member from Northside.
To you, Madam Speaker, in the minister's statement, she talks about all students. Can the minister give me and the people that I represent the assurance that all students includes the Aid Memorial Primary School, and that the Department of Education Services will not be allowed to do with whatever this review says, what they do with the national curriculum. Just unilateral decide what subjects that are required by the national curriculum that they will not provide in Northside due to supposedly lack of resources.
Honorable Minister for Education.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you for that question, member. As I said in my statement, the purpose of this review, the purpose of taking a critical analysis of the system as it stands now is to ensure that we are better able to address the needs of all students, and that includes students at the Edna Moyle Primary School.
I recognize the Honorable Deputy Premier for making of his statement this morning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, earlier this month, after a long and sometimes challenging journey, the Cayman Islands School of Hospitality became operational by welcoming 25 young Caymanians into its hospitality program. For the avoidance of doubt, the school is not a new facility that has been constructed, but rather, Madam Speaker, is a program that has been undertaken in collaboration with the Ministries of Tourism, Ministries of Education, along with the Department of Tourism, various private sector partners, and the University College of the Cayman Islands providing campus facilities and lectures. At various points along the way throughout the school's development, my ministry issued statements and releases to keep the public informed of its progress. On that basis, I would also like to take this opportunity to provide members with an update on the program and the impact it will have on the lives of our people, particularly in relation to employment and employability. Madam Speaker, on Monday, the members of this honorable House debated reforms to the immigration accreditation system, and government agreed to consider a model whereby a percentage of work permit fees would be paid into a segregated fund for the sole purpose of training our people to take up positions that they are currently unskilled and unqualified to pursue. In my opinion, Madam Speaker, that is a fair and reasonable proposal intended For the first time in Cayman, tourism's public and private sectors have worked more closely together than ever before to jointly create a program that is industry-driven and internationally accredited. It has been specifically designed to provide Caymanians with the necessary training and skills to not only take up front-facing positions in the hospitality sector, but to prepare them to become qualified professionals with a clear path for employment and advancement within the tourism industry. Madam Speaker, tourism is vital to our economic well-being and has the ability to greatly impact the daily lives of our people. To understand just how profound a role it can play, we must be mindful that the hospitality sector is comprised of more than waiters, waitresses serving in restaurants, front office staff at hotel reception desks, and taxi drivers, tour operators, and housekeepers. Madam Speaker, as with every type of business, the hospitality sector does have lower waged positions, but it also has a large number of highly paid, highly skilled roles which are filled by highly qualified professionals. Consequently, the goal of the hospitality school is to develop and inspire future professionals who, based on market demand, can play a greater role in the future development of this industry. While employability is central to the hospitality school program, and we are keen to increase the number of Caymanians in the industry, the primary goal is to provide each student with a solid foundation on which they can build lucrative and rewarding long-term careers in the tourism industry right here at home. Consequently, the courses offered will enable students to define the different components of tourism, such as transportation, lodging, food and beverage, attractions, and public tourism businesses, so that they can better be placed to discover career opportunities that align with their personal aspirations. Additionally, the course will include field trips and placements to a variety of hotels, restaurants, and attractions to acquaint students with the full scope of the industry. I can attest that the response from the private sector has been extremely gratifying, and commencing next week, meetings will be held with various participating establishments to solidify how many students can be accommodated at each location and to precise expectations from the students. Madam Speaker, at the end of the course, the students' final grades will be calculated based on a combination of examinations, class projects, and written assignments. Madam Speaker, the Cayman Islands is experiencing a massive upswing in visitor arrivals, and with more and more tourists crossing our borders than ever before, service quality and excellence are no longer mere expectations. They are non-negotiable requirements simply that must be met. The program therefore introduces students to the background and fundamental of service excellence. Given that customer expectations are consequently and constantly evolving, and what we regard as excellent today will quickly become the standard of tomorrow, students will be taught how to evaluate tasks and figure out how to enhance the customer experience. Using a systems-based approach, learning components will focus on people, processes, and environments, as well as their interrelationship within the customer service function. The concepts presented will then be reinforced through a series of practical applications that, again, have been designed to benefit students, not just throughout their internship in the program, but also during their subsequent careers. Madam Speaker, prospering in the dynamic hospitality and tourism environment requires a combination of flexibility, creativity, and training. Having been closely involved in its development over this year, I am confident that the Hospitality School is equipped to provide the best possible practical and technical training, which are the essential ingredients for operating in today's international tourism environment. I am also assured that the students who avail themselves to this training will be able to hit the ground running when they enter the industry and will have the best possible chance for a future career in tourism. Madam Speaker, outside of its contribution to the economy, for tourism to be truly impactful on the lives of our people, it must be used far more conclusively as a tool which generates employment, drives businesses, and keeps revenue multiplying throughout our communities. Madam Speaker, I'm on record for saying that our people are our most valuable asset. And while it is undoubtedly gratifying to consistently achieve great tourism performance and exceed monthly targets, if the effects of our record-breaking statistics are not trickling down to small business owners, craft vendors, and taxi drivers, and the like, and impacting their lives in a positive and tangible way, then we are merely skirting around the edges of opportunity, and our efforts are seriously missing the mark. The School of Hospitality Studies will go a long way towards rebalancing and redistributing the pieces of the proverbial pie by ensuring that Caymanians, particularly our young people, will finally be in a position to contribute to and benefit from the industry's success to the extent that they should be. Their participation will also help to infuse the distinctly local flavor into the tourism sector that is reflective of our national identity and is in keeping with what visitors expect when they come to our shores. Madam Speaker, the collaboration that has taken place between the Ministries of Tourism and Education, UCCI, the Department of Tourism, and the private sector partners has been nothing short of exemplary. I would like to publicly thank and acknowledge the myriad of dedicated individuals, particularly those on the Hospitality School Advisory Council, for their invaluable guidance, support, and commitment to driving this initiative forward. I would also like to wish the first class of students the very best of luck as they follow their dreams of being part of our thriving and vibrant hospitality industry. Madam Speaker, in closing, I would just like to acknowledge the Honorable Minister of Education, Tara Rivers, President Mr. Roy Bodden of UCCI, Mr. Wayne Jackson, Hospitality School Director, Mrs. Rosa Harris, Director of Tourism, and her team at the Department of Tourism, Mr. Kenneth Hides, Cayman Islands Tourism Association, the School of Hospitality Studies Advisory Councils, whose membership includes Mr. Marcus Mary from Abacus, Mark Langevin from the Ritz-Carlton, Valerie Hope from the Marriott, Mr. Rod McDowell from Red Sails, and a list of others that is too numerous to mention here this morning. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Recognize the member from East End.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, again, pursuant to Standing Order 32, I beg your permission to ask a few questions.
Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, a couple of things the minister said in here that I beg clarification on. He talked about firstly he talked about the trickle-down effect of tourism onto small businesses and taxi drivers and the like, and the impact it has on their lives in a positive and tangible way. And if that is not happening, then we are skirting around it and missing the mark. While I appreciate his sentiments, can the minister say why is it that our taxi drivers driving permits are extended so much to people who are not Caymanian, have no point of reference here, and the majority of our taxes are driven by people who are, many of our taxes are driven by people who are on work permit. I know they work for Caymanian, but why are we constantly extending these to them? Because that is focal in skirting around the tangible impact for Caymanians.
Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the law is that a taxi license can only be issued to a Caymanian.
Member from East End.
Madam Speaker, is the minister telling me there are nobody on work permits driving buses, taxis, public transport, public transportation in this country?
Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the members asked two questions. One, a taxi license is issued to a Caymanian and it must be operated by a Caymanian. A tour operator is different from the standpoint that if you look at the example of the tour buses, other businesses are dependent on a tour bus as the conduit to get business to them. Example being Stingray City boat operators, Turtle Farm, Pedro, they depend on tour operators to bring business. So tour operator licenses are issued to Caymanians, but if there is no it turns into an immigration issue then that they have to advertise for people to drive the bus if they cannot find a Caymanian to drive it.
Member from Easton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, can I then ask the Minister, why is it that the Caymanians who apply for taxi license are not given full opportunity to go to the ports or the airport and have the choice of going to any of them that they so choose?
Honorable Deputy Premier, I'll allow one question after this.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to make it very clear that we have been in a position to issue 40 new taxi licenses because of the growth of tourism over the last 12 months in this country. There was a moratorium on taxi licenses before that. We took a decision that we want to increase and give opportunities to Caymanians who drive taxis because of creating more opportunity by building our tourism industry and bringing more people here. The management of that, then you look at it and you try to estimate the peak. You can't estimate the valley, because if you estimate the least amount of people that are here, then you don't have enough taxi licenses and operators in place to fill the demand when the maximum amount are on the island. So that's what we're trying to do in managing that, and it is now a work in progress of how we assign between the airport and the port because of managing the new arrivals, the growth, and bringing new people into the industry.
Member from Easton.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I could ask more questions on that, but since you said the only one left, let me utilize my time much better. And I'll talk to him off here about that. Madam Speaker, I note that in the Advisory Council membership, there aren't those Caymanians who have been successful in this industry, who has 20, 30 years of experience in this industry, in the tourism industry, I mean. I can think of two right off, at least one from East End, William Conley, who has been who has lots of experience in this industry. Extremely successful in that industry as a livelihood, since that's what the Premier wants. He's always picking on me, eh? But Madam Speaker, I mean, and there are other Caymanians as well who could advise on this. And these look like managers, imported managers at these different hotels, who short tenure on the island and has no point of reference where that mango tree is by that tamarind tree.
Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I thank the member for his question. If he looks at the last page and the acknowledgements, Mr. Ken Hyde and the Cayman Island Tourism Association is acknowledged because of their participation. And if you think of the members that are involved there, and we could certainly name out quite a few that have been making contributions as well. And I tried to identify that and the other ones that are numerous to mention. Okay, the council itself is balanced between the director of tourism, and trying to get people that volunteered to work. The mention of managers from the different properties. Remember that what we have been able to accomplish here is a model that I believe will be used in other educating systems in the Cayman Islands because of the participation between private and public sector. And the need for the major hotels to be involved and the need for the major participation of their managers to be involved to make sure that we get people working and to make sure that they are involved is very necessary. It's not saying that there was a majority of them, but they did participate.
Member from Easton, is that a plea for another question, or you?
Yes, Madam Speaker, if you would, please.
All right, please make it a question or not a statement so we can proceed.
Okay, Madam Speaker. But you know it proceeds with that. Madam Speaker, the minister said that these people are there so we can get people employed. I am concerned about that. If we're going, the carrot is now coming out and it got honey dripping off it now too, look like, to get done what is supposed to be done. But nevertheless, Madam Speaker, my question is, why aren't those who would experience, and let me name another one without getting too deeply involved and declaring my interest in it, but Jerris Miller, nearly 40 years of service in this industry. And I don't see him represented on here. We need Caymanians to try and advise on what it means to come up through the ranks, which is where we're starting, to bring our people up through the ranks to become successful in this industry. That's my question. Why aren't we using them? Two, in addition to.
Honorable Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to advise the member that they are being used, and I will reach out and make sure you're invited to the next function, because the individual you spoke of, Mr. Jerris Miller, was actually there, and he participated in the meeting that we had of how the school was going to be opened, and he and I personally spoke there. I believe that if you speak to him, he will tell you that he's quite excited about this program.
Next item of business.
Other business, private member motions, private member motion number 7 of 2014-15, amendment to the National Trust Law 2010 revision, to be moved by the elected member for Northside and seconded by the elected member for East End.
Recognize the member from Northside.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I wish to move private members motion number 7, motion to amend National Trust Law 2010 revision. Whereas when the National Trust Law was passed by the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands in 1987, it was not intended that it become a land bank. Whereas it was never intended that the trust executive would aggressively and deliberately seek to purchase land. And whereas Section 21(2) of the National Trust Law 2010 revision provides that any land made inalienable can be alienated by 2/3 of the membership. Be it therefore resolved that government consider amending the National Trust Law 2010 revision to provide that the National Trust may only purchase land to be made inalienable only after approval of this Legislative Assembly, and that such inalienable land can only be alienated by this Legislative Assembly.
Is there a seconder? Recognize the member from East End.
Madam Speaker, I beg to second the motion.
The motion has been duly moved and is now open for debate. Does the honorable member from Northside wish to speak thereto?
Thank you. Madam Speaker, unfortunately, in my view, and in the view of many of the persons that I am elected to represent in these halls. The National Trust has become the evil empire that many of us who were here in 1987 were concerned that it would become. And National Trust, I know that the National Trust is not having to use the compulsory land acquisition law. This is a situation between a willing seller and a more than willing buyer. But, Madam Speaker, I have some concerns, and I don't believe that many people in the Cayman Islands understand and appreciate the extent to which my constituency in particular is being affected and the way future generations are being deprived of any ability to live in that constituency. And Madam Speaker, that is because of the sheer magnitude, volume, and acreage of the land that the National Trust has purchased in my constituency over the past 2 or 3 decades, since the land been put, since the National Trust been established. Madam Speaker, I believe it is fair to say that when the National Trust was established, the intent of the legislators bringing the law and the intent of the legislators who supported the law, that the National Trust was not intended to be a body that would go out and solicit to purchase people's land, but would be concerned with land that had maybe a particular environmental value, land that had on it particular historical or heritage sites, and the National Trust would assist the government in identifying these sites and where the registered owners of the land were willing to sell the land, the National Trust would buy the land. And because we believed at that time that it was prudent to establish such a body, to hold these sites in trust for the people of the Cayman Islands. What we did not envisage was that the National Trust would buy a large percentage of the arable land in a constituency and make it inalienable and have the ability to prevent the people from that constituency who traditionally use these lands for our heritage purposes. And I'll use an example. The Mastic Reserve, they call it. Madam Speaker, for many years, the Mastic Reserve area was the breadbasket of Northside, and in particular, Old Man Bay. This is where the people farmed. This is where the people cut tops to make thatch rope. This is where the people got the mahogany, the ironwood to build their houses. This is where the people got the mahogany and the ironwood to build the schooners that we built in the district. This is where the people hunted rabbits. This is where the people hunted crabs. This is where the people got mangoes and other fruit that grew wild. And Madam Speaker, I know that some of that freeness that we as constituents enjoy, technically under the law, could be classified as trespassing or stealing. But it was an accepted thing in the community that you could go in these areas of land, and if you needed an ironwood post for the corner of your house, you could cut the ironwood tree down. If you needed a piece of mahogany to make a door frame or to make a bedpost, you could cut it down. Nobody bothered you. Now, Madam Speaker, what has happened over that decade is that the majority, far too great a percentage of my constituency, has now become National Trust property, and those heritage acts can no longer be enjoyed. Because, Madam Speaker, I will quote from Section 18 of the National Trust Law. And it says, a person who takes or attempts to take any wildlife, either flora or fauna, on trust property. B, starts any fire on trust property, except in any area where under the bylaws of the trust fires are permitted. I can't find any of those. C, removes any artifact from any trust property. D, defaces any trust property, or refuses to leave trust property when required to do so by an officer, employee, or agent of the trust under Section 17, is guilty of an offense. And Madam Speaker, Section 21 says, person who is convicted of an offense under this law or any regulations made thereunder is liable on summary convictions to a fine of $5,000 and to imprisonment for 1 year. What that means, Madam Speaker, if I decide to go down in what we call Upper Mastic, sit down in a mango tree and shoot a rabbit for Sunday dinner, I could be fined $5,000 and to imprisonment for 1 year. If I go down in there and I pick up a couple of mangoes, or I pull a couple of tops out of a thatched tree, I am committing an offense under this law. And, Madam Speaker, I know that most members have no idea what I'm talking about. So I went to and got a map of the island prepared. And on that map, I asked them to put all National Trust owned properties. And Madam Speaker, I will table this when.
Okay.
Right. Well, I think they already have copies that they can distribute if.
Okay, when the sergeant returns to the chamber, I'll ask him to
I
distribute
have gone one step further, Madam Speaker, and colored it black, so I'm not sure that the one that they have is colored black. But anyway, you will see from that map, Madam Speaker, that in West Bay, the land owned by the National Trust is so small, it can't appear on a map.
Member, sorry for the interruption again. Did you say you had a map of just Grand Cayman or
Just Grand
all
Cayman.
the islands?
Just Grand Cayman.
Okay.
I seen a paper today where they're buying land in Cayman Braga. Well, no, that's okay.
Thank you.
You will see from the map that Georgetown, the land owned here, again, is so small, it doesn't appear on this map. Bordentown has one little slither of land from the north, from the Little Sound. East End has the Salinas, which is, we know, is useless land when it comes to farming and living on, right? But north side, there's a huge portion of that that has been bought up by the National Trust. And no north sider will be allowed to go into this land to get anything. No North Sider will be able to buy a piece of this from anybody to build a house, plant a yam, plant a piece of cassava stick, plant a mango tree or a pear tree. No North Sider will be able to walk across this land or will be given right away over any of this land to get to their own land so they can build a house on it. Because, Madam Speaker, in addition to buying up this land, what in my view are deflated and deliberately deflated rates per acre by the National Trust. The National Trust is being absolutely uncooperative by any landowner in that district who needs any help from them at all. And, Madam Speaker, I'm a life member of the National Trust. There was a time when the National Trust had, as the law says they shall have, district committees in each district. It has been, to my knowledge, at least 10, if not 15 years, they haven't had a district committee in Northside. And they have made no attempt to set one up, Madam Speaker, because when they came out in support of the Department of the Environment to lay over all of these environmental zones and sterilize, at that time, 70% of the Northside constituency, including this area, the Northside District Council went through the district and got between 25, I think it was 28 people to come to the annual general meeting. Paid, those who were not yet members, paid their vote. And when the National Trust people found out that we were going to elect one of our own on the executive, they called the police on us. They ruled that we couldn't vote. They ruled they couldn't vote anybody. And, Madam Speaker, that was the beginning of the destruction of the love and support that the people of my constituency had for the National Trust. Madam Speaker, nobody spent more time than my dear mother helping the National Trust with their memory banks and all that sort of stuff. And if you go in the Northside Civic Center now, you will see what I don't think any other district has, which was done by the Northside District Trust Company. A map of the district with all of the houses and all of the families and where they were first resident in that district in the Civic Center on permanent display. But when you take this high-handed approach and you use your numerical numbers and your money to force these people or to keep these people from participating in the process about their own district, that's what it results in. Now, Madam Speaker, I got told off that night by one landowner because I had brought him to Georgetown and made him fork up his $25, which he couldn't afford, and he couldn't get anything. And his comment was, the next time you call me, I bring him a machete and a shotgun. And, Madam Speaker, first of all, what the National Trust has fostered in this country as the Mastic Trail is one of the biggest lies ever perpetrated by people in this country who don't know what they're talking about. You're asking the North Side where the Mastic Trail is, not what they have. It is not what they publish as the Mastic Trail. Right? I hear the... Madam Speaker, I can tell them, because I don't think the Minister of Environment, who's on the National, can let me know. The mastic trail that we use went in opposite Hideaway, now called Nico Norte. Anyway, the bar just before you come to the hill. No, I don't identify like that. But there's a tamarind tree in the side of the road, right? North Coast Bar, right opposite North Coast Bar. There's a tamarind tree in the side of the road that was the entrance to Mastic Trail. And when the family who owns the land applied to government to do a housing scheme and sell lots there, they voluntarily protected that tamarind tree and moved the road so the tamarind tree could be preserved, because it was the entrance to the Mastic Trail. The exit for the Mastic Trail on the south side of the road came out below Dollars and Breakers, where Waldo used to come out, where the Scots now go to get to their mall pit. But we get all these people come here, they go up in there, they tell the world, we're going to preserve the Mastic Trail, and it enters behind the fire station in Franktown and comes out behind Sharon Lee House down in Old Crawl. They don't even know what that's called. That's not Mastic Trail, that's Old Crawl. Right? Then you hear them on the radio making this big announcement. This is virgin forest. Virgin forest? Madam Speaker, they have no idea how many mahogany trees, ironwood trees were cut down up in there to build houses and boats. Forever. I just made candle holders for every one of my mother's grandchildren out of the corner posts for the Northside Presbyterian Church that was cut by my great-great-great-grandfather in 1902 in Mastic. That's where Grandpa Jack cut it from. But you see, Madam Speaker, to come here and anything these people tell us, we take it for gospel. I can promise you that the former Speaker of this House, Mrs. Edna Moyle, father, burnt them grass pieces down to twice a year sometime to kill ticks. But it's virgin, never been touched. And Madam Speaker, this is what is going on. My constituency has one thing. We did not come up in arms when they started to buy some of this land, because you suspected they would buy 10, 15 acres. That'd be enough. And we would have had nothing to say about that. But not when you buy this much, and not when you continue to aggressively seek to buy more. And I know, Madam Speaker, they'll tell the public they're not doing it. But they be careful. Be careful how they make that claim. Because it ain't so. Madam Speaker, Sir Vassal Johnson, who moved this bill in this House, had this to say when he moved the bill. And I quote from the Hansard of it's so old, Madam Speaker, they don't have any date on it, but it was the Debate on Government Business National Trust Bill 1987, first reading. He said, Mr. President, one of the areas in looking at legislation which is also important is to assure that the operation of the trust is such, and listen carefully, members, that it does not accumulate an abundance of power which would lead at some time to challenging even government. Very prophetic words. He hoped, and he assured the House that that's not what he was setting out to do. But we realize that's what happened. It has happened this year. The government had a gazetted road, east-west arterial way. After the road was gazetted, the National Trust went and bought property on the other side of it. And they have made representation to the government, and the government buckled because they're so powerful. And they have moved the road off of government-owned land, because that's what National Trust is. It's owned by the people of this country, not by the executive of the National Trust. They have moved the road off the government land onto private land, which the government can now have to pay to use. And Madam Speaker, it's not a situation where now the land that the government own is any different from the land that the private sector owns, that the private people own. The same land, same kind of land. And it is my understanding, Madam Speaker, that they were even able to negotiate in that government can build them a rest area and a special house and all this from to tour this Mastic Trail, which they've invented as part of the deal for them not opposing the road. And Madam Speaker, the motion seeks a specific amendment to the law. I don't seek to amend the section that I quoted, 18 or 20, where so that anybody would be able to destroy anything that the National Trust owns. That's not what the motion calls for. I don't seek to change the offenses or the penalties under the law. The motion is asking for one simple thing: an amendment to section 21. Because, Madam Speaker, and I quote from the law, 21:1, any property acquired by the trust may, by means which is eligible for placement on the Heritage Register under the bylaws of the trust, may be declared inalienable by the council. And Madam Speaker, let's hear who the council is. The council is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 people. So 11 people can decide that the trust haven't bought a piece of land in my constituency, can make it inalienable, and all of these things have, right? And then, Madam Speaker, here is my big fear. Because, Madam Speaker, 11 persons haven't made it inalienable. Section 2 is the most troubling of all. Property which has been declared inalienable by the council may be
So remember section 2?
Section
Or
21, subsection 2.
Okay.
Sorry, ma'am. Property which has been declared inalienable by the council may be alienated only after a 2/3 vote of the full membership of the trust at a general meeting, and only for the reasons that so doing will further the purposes of the trust. Madam Speaker, what that means to me is that 2/3 of this membership, which may not include membership from my constituency, because they don't have a district council there anymore, can decide that piece of this land could be made into a golf course. But the real reason that they need to sell it is because the trust needs a couple of $100,000 to finish this building that government ain't gonna be afford to build from. So they have a meeting, and they get 2/3 of their membership to vote to remove the inalienable ruling over the land. And they sell it to a private developer. So, Madam Speaker, what my motion wants to do is to amend Section 21 to say, because I believe they're buying too much land, that they can only purchase land that this Legislative Assembly approves, irrespective of who's funding it. Land use in this country is controlled by the development plan and this Legislative Assembly. And most certainly, Madam Speaker, that having made it inalienable, only this Legislative Assembly can make it alienable so they can sell it. And only this Legislative Assembly should be able to sell the land. That's all my motion is asking for, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, I trust that members will support the small amendment to the law, because I believe it will give all of us certain comfort in knowing that this land, if it is ever going to be sold, has to come here, where at least the people's elected representative can have a say in whether it's sold or not. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Does any other member wish to speak?
He distributed this thing.
Yeah, as soon as the sergeant returns, so ordered for the tabling thereof. Does any other member wish to speak? Last call. Does any other member wish to speak or recognize the Honorable Minister responsible for the environment?
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise to respond to the private member's motion from the member from Northside on behalf of the government. Madam Speaker, the National Trust, as the member has noted, was created by a law called the National Trust Law in 1987, passed in 1987 by this Honorable House. The purpose for the National Trust, the creation of the National Trust, is set out in the law. But let me read first Section 3 of the National Trust Law, which deals with the establishment of the trust. It provides, there is established a body corporate called the National Trust for the Cayman Islands, which shall have perpetual succession and a common seal, and for the purpose of carrying out its functions under this law, may buy, lease, sell, hold, deal, and otherwise acquire and dispose of property of whatsoever nature, enter into contracts of any nature, raise loans and sue and be sued in its corporate name. So this law, Madam Speaker, creates a body corporate which has all of these powers. And in particular, just for emphasis, it has the power to buy, sell, hold, deal, and otherwise acquire and dispose of property. Madam Speaker, Section 4 of the law sets out the purpose or purposes and powers of the trust in more detail. Subsection 1 of Section 4 says the purposes of the trust are A, the preservation of the historic, natural, and maritime heritage of the islands through the preservation of areas, sites, buildings, structures, and objects of historic or cultural significance. B, the conservation of lands, natural features, and submarine areas of beauty, historic, or environmental importance, which the trust may have acquired through gift, bequest, purchase, lease, or other means. And C, the protection of native flora and fauna. Subsection 2 of Section 4, Madam Speaker, provides that the trust has the power to carry out the following activities. A, the identification, investigation, classification, protection, and preservation of any place, building, area of beauty, or of historic, cultural, or environmental significance, and the creation and maintenance of a heritage register thereof. Subclause B of subsection 2 provides the acquisition of any property by gift, bequest, purchase, lease, or other means, and the maintenance, sale, or leasing of any such land or thing. Madam Speaker, it goes on to list a variety of other powers, which for these purposes, I don't think I need to refer to at this point. I think the law is very clear, Madam Speaker, on the trust's purposes in terms of conservation, in terms of identifying and recognizing property and areas of historical, cultural, or environmental value to this country. It clearly has the power to buy, hold, deal with such property as any other body corporate so empowered or any individual in this country, Madam Speaker. The only limitation we have in terms of ownership of land and the ability to buy land in this country is that foreign companies have to be registered in Cayman as a foreign company in order to be able to acquire and hold land in the Cayman Islands. Other than that, Madam Speaker, ownership of land is unrestricted, that is one of the features that has been central to the success of Cayman as an area of development, a country of development, and the tourism development, tourism industry, and the significance of that industry. Madam Speaker, one thing that will be of interest in terms of understanding why the National Trust was created, why it has these powers, will be for us to look back at the comments made by the presenter of the bill, who was no less than Sir Vassal Johnson. And Madam Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to refer to the Hansard.
Please proceed, and again, once the sergeant has returned to the chambers, I'd like to see a copy, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Honorable Vassal G. Johnson said on the presentation of this bill on the 11th of September 1987, he said, "Mr. President, a national trust is said to be synonymous with preservation of a country's heritage, and thus the reason why it is so appealing and it is so acceptable in most countries of the world. It is said that from the earliest time, man recognized that God had given him certain possessions which he should preserve. That has come down through the ages, and we find that in the Cayman Islands, our own homeland, there are many things that we need to preserve. Some of the functions described, Madam Speaker, include create parks, preserve sites and buildings of national interest, preserve marine parks, and also to preserve, maintain, and keep animal and bird sanctuaries. But he wasn't being exhaustive there. He went on to say, Madam Speaker, these functions, Mr. President, are very important. It is important to a nation and to a country because of their scenery and historical values. These properties are set aside by the National Trust and are preserved from destruction so as to ensure the people's inspiration, enjoyment, and recreation where these sites, these historical sites and properties are concerned. A national trust is usually created to develop a means of avoiding ruinous effects on these things, which are of immense interest to the country, terrestrial and marine properties. And Mr. President, there is no doubt in anyone's mind here of the importance of these to our little Cayman Islands. He went on to say, subsequently, Madam Speaker, and I'm quoting again, Mr. President, it is always found to be very useful and acceptable for a national trust to control these heritage values of the country as opposed to government undertaking this or that responsibility. One of the reasons is that there is a far keener interest displayed by the trust in performing these duties as opposed to government. Secondly, it would cost the trust less to perform these duties because the trust is always open to gifts of money and time, and people are prepared to give voluntary service. And so the trust has an appealing position so as far as its work and value are concerned. That, Madam Speaker, is a part of the presentation made by the mover of the bill at that time, which clearly highlights the value perceived at the time and why this trust was being set up for government or by government to be owned and operated separate from government. Madam Speaker, the member moving the motion referred to another aspect of the presentation made by Sir Vassal Johnson on that day. And he did say, as quoted by the member, he said, Mr. President, one of the areas in looking at legislation, which is also important, is to ensure that the operation of the trust is such that it does not accumulate an abundance of power, which could at some time lead to challenging our government. He said that. I will address that in a few minutes. What he also said, Madam Speaker, at that time, is an assurance to the people and to the members of the House, which, as the mover from the member from Northside, as the mover acknowledged, he was a member present for that debate. He also said, I am happy to say that the legislation before us today has been well scrutinized, well examined by government, by the legal department, and by the committee that was established in 1985 to recommend the establishment of a trust for the Cayman Islands. So, Madam Speaker, while he expressed a general view of caution, which one might anticipate in creating a national trust, he also said very clearly that the government, all the various government bodies, including the Attorney General at the time, and this special committee that had been created of ordinary members of Cayman society, which had apparently worked on this bill for some period of months, that they had all satisfied themselves. They had scrutinized this bill, and they were recommending the bill to establish the National Trust. Madam Speaker, one of the things that's interesting about the record of this Hansard, in this Hansard, for this Honourable House, is that the mover of the motion, the member from, my good friend, the member from Northside, has sat through the debate on this bill, sat through the second reading, and made no comment, made no contribution, expressed no concern. Madam Speaker, again, with your permission, I will refer to the Hansard in respect to the same bill,
Please proceed.
in which there was a discussion or debate in relation to a motion to recommit the bill to committee stage. I think there was a proposal to make an amendment in respect of a date which was included in the bill, which for these purposes are not relevant. What is relevant, Madam Speaker, is that the mover of the motion today, the member from North Side, did speak in relation to that particular motion to recommit the bill. And this is what he said, Madam Speaker. He said, Mr. President, I'd like to try to restore the dignity and statesmanship in this debate. He said, I didn't speak on the bill during the second reading debate, as I believe such legislation should be above political rhetoric. For the same reason, I intend to vote against recommittal of the bill and will therefore now support the motion not to recommit the bill. He said, Mr. President, I have sat here for almost 2 days and now listened to debate which in my opinion was frivolous and in most instances irrelevant to the main issue. And there he was referring to the debate on the second, or the motion to recommit. He said, Madam Speaker, the members have pounded their political chests and have, in my opinion, reduced the value of this important piece of legislation in the eyes of the public. I believe they have ignored or taken for granted the value. Certainly they have depreciated the value and time put into developing this legislation by the steering committee. So he went on, Madam Speaker, to vote against committal of the bill back to committee stage at that point. But it is important that the record reflect the members' position, that it was a very important piece of legislation, that it should not be subject to political rhetoric, that it should not be through this back and forth debate on a particular small point argument over a date be depreciated in the eyes of the people, and he fully supported it. Madam Speaker, turning to his motion and the specific recitals referred to in the motion. The first recital, Madam Speaker, says that the National Trust, or it says, and whereas when the National Trust law was passed by the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands in 1987, it was not intended that the National Trust become a land bank. Madam Speaker, when one refers to a land bank, one is typically referring to land being accumulated for the purpose of investments to store wealth. But if in this case, the member means that the National Trust was storing the wealth of the nation, which is represented by its areas of cultural, historic, and environmental value, then I suppose I can agree that the National Trust is a land bank. But then he must also agree that when one looks at the expressed purpose and powers of the National Trust, that is precisely one of the things that was envisaged when the law was passed. And when the members stood up to present and consider this bill in this honorable House. Madam Speaker, the mover has expressed to me in the past that he didn't think the trust had the power to buy land. And clearly, I think we've satisfied that issue today. I think it is clear that it has the power and has been exercising the power in accordance with the stated objectives in the trust law. Perhaps the argument of the members that the trust has simply been doing too good a job in respect of that. Madam Speaker, the member says that the member complains that the National Trust has acquired, first of all, he said, the majority of the land in Northside. I think if we look at the map which he very helpfully tabled, and assuming it is accurate, we can see that it is not a majority. In any event, Madam Speaker, one of the things that is very clear is that the National Trust does not have the power to take someone's land. This land, which the National Trust owns in the District of Northside, is land which anyone, any individual, any investor could have purchased in the Cayman Islands. Now, we have other examples of landowners who have acquired large parcels and aggregated them over time. But, Madam Speaker, that may be in those circumstances where there is this aggregation for the purpose of creating this investment, this land bank, as the member says. Perhaps you might quarrel in respect to that, but the fact is the system we have allows people to purchase this land. Similarly, it allows the National Trust to purchase this land. But they're not purchasing the land, Madam Speaker, to create a development, to do harm in some way to the district or the interests of the country as a whole. They're purchasing the land in furtherance of their clear purpose and objective, which is set out in the National Trust law. One of the concerns that were expressed, Madam Speaker, at the time the National Trust law bill was being discussed and contemplated, was that perhaps government would, through the compulsory acquisition provisions of the lands acquisition law, compulsorily acquire people's land to give it to the National Trust. And that specific issue was raised by Sir Vassal in presenting the bill, and he gave certain assurances in respect of that. And clearly there is no power in the law for the trust to acquire land through any other means other than in terms of their own action, in terms of what they can do, other than by accepting it as a gift or purchasing the land. During the debate on the National Conservation Bill, Madam Speaker, pardon me, the mover of the motion, I specifically recall, quite rightly said that, as did the member from East End, quite rightly said that
the districts, those two districts had the most environmentally well-preserved land. He quite rightly said that. So, Madam Speaker, it shouldn't be a surprise that the more unspoiled areas of the island would be of interest to the National Trust in fulfilling its objective of preserving land which has a cultural, historical, and environmental value to the country. Madam Speaker, the second recital says whereas it was never intended that the trust executive would aggressively and deliberately seek to purchase land. Madam Speaker, we haven't had, first of all, any evidence that there is this activity going on which the member complains of, but secondly, and more importantly, how is that offending if the trust seeks to protect and preserve land in accordance with its objective, with its stated purpose in the law? I don't hear the member complaining about that aspect of it. But how does that offend if they are simply trying to fulfill their stated objective? They recognize, and I hear the members' statement, Madam Speaker, that the Mastic Trail, for example, is not where the National Trust says it is not where the National Trust has acquired land for the purpose of preserving the Mastic Trail. But certainly, it is well recognized that that area has huge environmental significance, and that at least a part of it must reflect a part of the Mastic Trail. Madam Speaker, it's no coincidence either that you have the Botanic Park nearby, because these are areas in which the natural environment that is already established allows for the creation of, and in addition to things that are reflective of environmental value to the country. Madam Speaker, the member seems to be complaining that the National Trust is approaching some of his constituents in relation to a discussion about potentially acquiring land. That may or may not be the case, but even if it is hard to see why that is in any way offensive. Again, they're fulfilling their objective. But what is also true, Madam Speaker, is that there are many constituents of the good people in Northside, good people in Northside, good families in Northside who own land there, who have approached the National Trust, seeking to have the National Trust purchase their land. Madam Speaker, when the National Trust purchases land, my understanding is they have a policy generally of obtaining two valuations and they try to negotiate a value within the two positions to the extent that one is higher or lower than the other one. That does not appear on the face of it, Madam Speaker, to be an unfair approach at all. And certainly it is difficult to see why families in Northside, individuals who own land in Northside, should not be able to sell their land to the National Trust if they want to. They can sell the land to anybody else, but not the National Trust. Is that what the member is saying? Madam Speaker, the National Trust has indeed, I'm sure, bought land from families in Northside. It is also true that the National Trust has acquired or purchased land from non-Caymanians who have purchased the land from families in Northside or Northside landowners. So I'm not quite sure why the ability to do that, the ability to fulfill its objectives, should be an issue. Madam Speaker, turning to the resolve section of the member's motion. Madam Speaker, the member says firstly that he'd like the law amended to provide that the trust may only purchase land to be made inalienable after approval of this legislative assembly. And secondly, that such inalienable land can only be alienated by this legislative assembly. But Madam Speaker, when this bill was being moved, when it had been considered by everyone in government, when very significant members of Caymanian society, very, very prominent, eminent, educated members of Caymanian society who were involved with the steering committee, when they looked at all of this and proposed this bill and supported this bill with the provisions that are reflected here today, there was no concern being expressed then that the Legislative Assembly had to be involved in this question of making land which the trust has purchased inalienable, or in reversing that. Madam Speaker, I think there was a misunderstanding, really, of exactly what this means to make land or property owned by the trust inalienable. Madam Speaker, Section 21(1) provides any property acquired by the trust may by any means which is eligible for placement on the Heritage Register under the bylaws of the trust may be declared inalienable by the council. What that means, Madam Speaker, and let me clarify, there is a separate set of National Trust bylaws which have been properly adopted, which sets out the Heritage Register. Which has to be, that first condition has to be satisfied, Madam Speaker, that it is property that is eligible for placement on the Heritage Register. It's not all trust property. It is trust property which, according to the National Trust bylaws, can be included on the the National Heritage Register. Madam Speaker, the National Heritage Register there are criteria for that, which is established. Obviously, the law, and this was again also described by the member moving the bill, Sir Vassal. The effects of Section 21, 1 and 2 were set out in full and were deemed to be and considered to be an appropriate mechanism, a desirable mechanism to try to protect the interests of this property, the value of this property to the country and to the National Trust through the mechanism of the National Trust. But what is the effect of having done that, Madam Speaker? That simply means, Madam Speaker, that the Council, in making this decision, is saying, in declaring it inalienable under Section 21(1), is saying that it is binding itself to not make a decision to sell that land, to part with possession. Alienation simply means the ability to transfer ownership. That is effective within the trust. That binds the hands of the council only. It doesn't extend beyond the council. It doesn't have any, or beyond the National Trust, it doesn't have any extraordinary meaning beyond that. Section 21(2), Madam Speaker, provides that property which has been declared inalienable by the council may be alienated only after a 2/3 vote of the full membership of the trust at a general meeting, and only for the reason that so doing will further the purposes of the trust. So you have a council who says, yes, this property can satisfies the criteria to go in the National Heritage Register. We think that this property should be declared inalienable. We are going to make it so. We are going to tie our hands so that as a council, we no longer have the power to transfer that land or sell it. The check in respect of that, Madam Speaker, is that there's a higher bar, much higher bar, to reverse that. And that higher bar, Madam Speaker, is firstly that you have to have the full membership of the trust at an annual general meeting. That in itself is going to be a very significant task. Then you have to have 2/3 of that entire National Trust membership voting to reverse the council's decision to make it inalienable, make a particular piece of property or properties inalienable. Then it also has to be in furtherance of the purposes of the trust. Can't be for, and the purposes are quite specifically set out. Can't be for any old reason. Madam Speaker, in doing this, the trust is furthering its objectives. The trust is exercising the powers that it has by law. It is seeking to protect and preserve property which has historical, cultural, or environmental value to this country. It is acting properly. But, Madam Speaker, this concept of alienation is one which I said earlier is confined strictly within the trust. It has no effect outside of the trust. It has no effect outside of the trust law itself. So, for example, Madam Speaker, the member gave an example of the discussion earlier this year in relation to the East-West arterial. And the member indicated that government had to reach an agreement with the National Trust, because somehow the National Trust had accumulated these great powers, which all they were doing is exercising the powers that are set out in the law. And, Madam Speaker, that somehow they forced government's hand. Government, Madam Speaker, wished, as they would do with many, many landowners in relation to the alignment of roads, they wished to simply reach an agreement, if they could, to avoid concern and unnecessary displeasure over the particular route and location of the road. That is the reason government negotiated, and the trust sat down and they came to an agreement as to how to locate the road, which was acceptable to all. It was not that the National Trust had accumulated powers which were too great and so offensive and so contrary to the national interests of the country that they had government over a barrel and had the leverage to tell government what to do. That's not the case at all. In fact, Madam Speaker, under the roads law, Madam Speaker, Section 6 of the roads law provides, in any case where a declaration has been published under Section 3.1, and that declaration, perhaps, Madam Speaker, I should read Section 3.1 first, with your permission.
Kindly proceed.
Madam Speaker, Section 3.1 reads, whenever it appears to the governor, upon recommendation by the roads authority, that any particular portion of land is needed for the layout of a new public road, or the widening or diverting of an existing public road, a declaration to that effect shall be A, gazetted, B, sent by registered post, to the registered proprietor of the land at his address on the register, and C, published twice per week for 3 consecutive weeks in a daily newspaper, published and circulating in the islands. And Madam Speaker, we've all seen these. We've all seen these notices being published from time to time in relation to roads. Now, Madam Speaker, Section 6 of the law says, in any case where a declaration has been published under Section 3.1, and where the governor, upon recommendation by the roads authority, is satisfied that it is in the public interest to lay out, widen, or divert a road over the portion of land to which the declaration relates, then, notwithstanding anything contained in any other law, and subject to the provisions of this law which relate to the payment of compensation, the governor may, on the expiration of 15 days from the publication of the declaration, authorize the roads authority to enter upon the said portion of land and cause the said road or portion of road to be commenced or proceeded with without further notification. So clearly, Madam Speaker, and let me clarify one thing. Where in this law it refers to the governor, that is defined in the law as governor in cabinet. And in fact, as a result of the 2009 Constitution, Madam Speaker, that means the cabinet, because the cabinet prior to the 2009 Constitution was an advisory cabinet giving advice to the governor, subsequent to the 2009 Constitution. It is a decision-making body. So that means that the cabinet makes those decisions. So clearly, Madam Speaker, The trust has no great leverage in relation to the issue, and the example given had no great leverage in relation to the example given by the member from Northside. Cabinet had the ability to take the land, just like it could do with any other owner's property. The trust does not have any superior position in relation to land ownership, Madam Speaker, than any other person or any other non-governmental body. Madam Speaker, I could go further than that. The land acquisition law, Madam Speaker, is a law which enables government to effectively, compulsorily acquire property for the public good. So the question, Madam Speaker, is the National Trust superior to that? Whether or not they have made land inalienable. Now, Madam Speaker, Section 6 of the land acquisition law says whenever it appears to the governor, and again, that is to be read as the cabinet, that any particular land is needed for a public purpose, a declaration to that effect shall be gazetted. The declaration in subsection 2 says, Madam Speaker, the declaration shall state the district in which the land is situated, the purpose for which it is needed, its approximate area, and where a plan has been made of the land, the place where such plan can be inspected. There are two other subsections there, Madam Speaker, which I need not refer to at this point. But Madam Speaker, Section 7, subsection 1, reads, whenever a declaration has been made under Section 6, the governor shall, without delay, enter into negotiations for the purchase of the land to which the declaration relates, upon reasonable terms. So, Madam Speaker, that provides that once the cabinet has made a decision that land can be acquired, it can or needs to be acquired for a public purpose, it can negotiate with the landowner to see if an agreement can be reached. Failing that, Madam Speaker, Section 8 provides where a declaration has been made and published as required by Section 6, and where in respect of the land to which the declaration relates, the governor is satisfied that A, it has not been possible to conclude a satisfactory agreement under Section 7, B, the negotiations in connection with any such agreement have been or are being unduly delayed, or C, it is not in the public interest to enter into such negotiations, the governor may, by order under his hand, proceed to acquire and to enter upon and take possession of the land compulsorily acquired with this law. So, Madam Speaker, if the National Trust Council decides that a piece of land that it owns, a piece of property that it owns, built or unbuilt, satisfies the requirements, the criteria to go in the National Heritage Register, and is something which they would like to preserve in the interest of the country, in the interest of preserving the natural or historic or cultural wealth and heritage of the country, it can make that property inalienable. But that only ties the hands of the council. That only means that you've then for the council, for the trust to decide that they are going to make a conscious decision to sell it, there's a higher bar they have to satisfy. They have to go to the Section 21(2) bar, which is the annual general meeting, which is 2/3 of the entire membership of the trust, and for the purpose of the trust. Under the lands acquisition law, the cabinet can deal with any land, any particular land that is needed for a public purpose. The provisions of the National Trust Law, Madam Speaker, does not subvert or block or frustrate or disable the provisions of the Lands Acquisition Law or the Roads Law, pardon me. So I don't know what this evil empire is that has unrestricted powers, that is going around buying everything up, and the government can't do anything about it, and the government can't act in the national interest. It is impotent. It is completely prevented from and frustrated from being able to do anything in the public good and the national interest of the country. I don't know where that entity is, but it is not reflected in the National Trust Law. It is not reflected in the actions of the National Trust to this date, Madam Speaker. And Madam Speaker, the member from Northside spoke specifically about the Council of the National Trust. Madam Speaker, the Council is prescribed in the National Trust Law in terms of its composition. And for these purposes, Madam Speaker, I would simply like to refer to...
Honorable members, that your intention to include shortly, otherwise I'll be minded to take the luncheon break.
Madam Speaker, I would certainly agree that a break at this point would be welcome.
We'll now suspend until 2 p.m.